In a world filled with criticism and tension, one man stood out for his composure. What Barack Obama did that night was more than skillful. It was an example of staying true to your principles even when facing pressure. The sun was setting over Washington, D.C., coloring the sky with soft gold and rose hues that reflected off the glass panels of the National Leadership Forum. It was the type of event known for polite speeches, formal greetings, and the reserved smiles shared among global figures. Yet everyone attending understood that this evening would be different, because two people who had never shared a stage before were on the guest list: Barack Obama and Melania Trump. One was a former president widely respected for his steady approach. The other, a former first lady whose presence continued to attract attention. Different backgrounds, contrasting styles, yet both seated under the same bright chandeliers. The hall seemed alive with anticipation. Rows of guests whispered quietly, wondering how the interaction between the two might unfold. The atmosphere carried a low but noticeable tension, like energy quietly building beneath the surface. Reporters prepared their notebooks. Photographers adjusted their cameras. Political advisors exchanged quiet predictions, some expecting a cordial evening, others sensing possible friction. But no one could have predicted what was about to take place. At the front of the room, a long table covered with navy fabric displayed the name cards of senators, diplomats, and finally, side by side, Melania Trump and Barack Obama. When Melania walked in, heads naturally turned. She moved with measured grace, wearing a soft smile and maintaining upright posture, her heels echoing lightly across the marble floor. Cameras flickered behind her in rapid bursts. Obama arrived shortly after, calm, steady, wearing the familiar half-smile that tended to put people at ease while keeping them attentive. Their greeting was polite, a nod, a handshake, a brief exchange of "good evening." Nothing visibly tense, but there was an underlying awareness, like two strong currents meeting. When the event began, the host stepped on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice echoing warmly, "tonight we welcome individuals who have shaped modern America." The audience applauded as he spoke about the guests. When he said, "our two chief guests," the applause grew stronger. Obama acknowledged it with a modest smile. Melania gave a small, graceful nod. Then came the first major announcement. The opening remarks would be delivered by Melania Trump. The applause rose again as she stood. She walked to the podium with steady steps, her expression calm but slightly reserved, aware that every eye was fixed on her. Behind her, Obama sat quietly, hands folded, giving his full attention. No phone, no papers, simply watching. Melania reached the microphone, took a measured breath, and began speaking. Her voice carried its familiar accent, poised and intentional, with touches of warmth where appropriate. She thanked the organizers, spoke about leadership, and reflected on how unity and resilience shaped her time in public life. Everything so far went smoothly. Occasional polite applause. No surprises. Then her tone shifted slightly. She leaned closer to the microphone, scanning the room. "Today," she said, "our country is facing very real challenges. Inflation, the rising cost of living. These are not minor issues. More than 60% of Americans worry daily about paying their expenses. That is a fact." The hall grew quiet. People listened carefully. Heads nodded. "These problems did not appear suddenly," she continued. "Someone must take responsibility for where we are now." She paused, letting the next words land. "Poor leadership, flawed choices, and broken promises have brought us to this point. And we must remember who made those promises." The statement lingered in the room like a cold draft. She hadn't mentioned any names, but everyone understood the direction her speech was taking. A few guests shifted in their seats. A few people glanced toward Obama, who sat completely still, his expression neutral. Melania continued speaking. With steady confidence, she began comparing administrations, discussing responsibility, decision-making, and past errors. Then, unexpectedly, she brought up an old and sensitive subject, raising the question of whether a former president had truly been born in the United States. It was a clear reference, even without mentioning any names. A reaction moved through the audience. A woman in the front let out a quiet sigh. A man cleared his throat awkwardly. Even the cameras seemed unsure whether to zoom in or pull back. Melania's tone remained measured, but her words carried a noticeable sharpness. The speech was no longer only political. It had become pointed and intentional. Obama did not react. He blinked slowly once, maintaining his faint, controlled smile. For several minutes, Melania spoke about truth, image, and how leaders must demonstrate strength. She emphasized that people often follow what they see, not always what they hear. Her statements were polished, but each one sounded like a calculated challenge. When she finished, the room paused before offering applause, polite but uneasy. It was the kind of clapping that fills silence rather than signals approval. Melania smiled, nodded, and returned to her seat next to Obama. Her expression was calm, though her slightly quickened movements suggested she felt the intensity of the moment. Obama turned just enough to give a brief nod. Nothing more. The gesture made it clear he had heard everything but wasn't ready to respond. The audience, however, was ready. Whispering spread quickly. Did she really say that? Is he going to reply? What will he do? Everyone knew Obama was scheduled to speak next, and history had shown that he rarely missed an opportunity when he stepped up to the microphone. The applause from Melania's remarks faded into a quiet tension. It wasn't admiration. It was uncertainty. Some clapped automatically, others out of politeness, but the discomfort in the room was obvious. Melania sat with her hands folded neatly, though her fingers tapped lightly against the table. The air felt heavier now. Across from her, Obama remained composed, his posture easy, his face calm, but his eyes revealed something more focused. He didn't interrupt or react visibly. He simply listened, and his silence carried more weight than any immediate response. The host attempted to move the program forward. "Thank you, Mrs. Trump," he said, clearing his throat. "That was very insightful." He glanced at the cards in his hand, clearly trying to steer the event back on track, but the audience wasn't ready to let go of what had just been implied. Soft conversations filled the hall. A woman leaned toward her husband. "Did she really just?" "Yes," he whispered back. "She did." Everyone knew exactly what had happened. Melania had not only discussed inflation or leadership challenges. She had reintroduced an old accusation suggesting Obama wasn't born in the U.S. A claim long disproven, long set aside, but once repeated loudly in political speeches and headlines. And now, years later, she had brought it up again, with Obama sitting only feet away. As the murmurs spread, Melania straightened her posture. She didn't seem regretful. She seemed certain. To her, this was a direct point she felt was worth making. A press member scribbled notes quickly. Another adjusted his camera, hoping for a reaction from Obama. But Obama offered no reaction at all. No eye roll, no sigh, not even a shift in posture. Only control. He glanced down briefly, perhaps to collect his thoughts or steady his breath, and then he gave a small, familiar smile, the kind that suggested he wasn't surprised. At the podium, the host continued reading the schedule, his voice unsteady. "Next, we will hear from our other distinguished guest." He paused. The audience leaned forward. Former President Barack Obama. A low wave of chatter filled the room. Everyone understood. This was the moment. The moment everyone had been waiting for had arrived. But before Obama could stand, something happened that raised the tension even further. A man in the audience stepped up with a microphone. He was part of the open Q&A session planned earlier, though the timing now felt particularly risky. Speaking clearly, he asked, "Mrs. Trump, you mentioned leadership failures as a cause of inflation and economic challenges. Are you saying that former President Obama is responsible for what Americans are dealing with today?" The audience reacted instantly. All attention shifted back to Melania. She paused briefly, just enough to show she hadn't expected such a direct question. Then she lifted her chin and replied, "Yes, I believe decisions made in the past led to today's difficulties. Some leaders focused more on image and speeches than on practical action." Her words moved through the room with noticeable impact. She didn't say his name, but everyone understood the reference. Melania appeared composed, though a slight shake in her voice hinted at nerves, or perhaps the realization of the weight of her statement. She had openly challenged one of the most respected political figures, directly and publicly. From his seat, Obama exhaled quietly. He didn't look upset or defensive. If anything, he seemed mildly amused, like someone who knew the situation better than anyone assumed. He leaned back calmly, hands clasped, the light from the chandelier reflecting off his watch. It was clear he was preparing his response. The host stepped in. "Thank you, Mrs. Trump. Now, Please welcome President Barack Obama. His words sounded like the introduction to an important moment. The hall erupted in applause, louder and more sincere, as if people were eager to hear what he would say. Melania's confidence shifted. Her smile tightened slightly, and she glanced toward Obama, then looked away. Obama rose with his usual calm composure, each movement deliberate. The room fell silent again, and even his footsteps seemed noticeable. As he passed her, he gave a brief nod, polite but firm, before stepping to the podium. He adjusted the microphone and waited. He didn't speak immediately, using the silence to steady the room. The audience leaned forward, anticipating his words. Finally, after a long pause, he gave a small smile and said, "Well, that was quite a speech." A wave of nervous laughter followed. Even Melania managed a tentative smile. But Obama's gaze stayed steady. "You know," he continued, "it's interesting when people talk about truth while standing in a room full of people who know the truth." The room fell silent once more. His tone was measured and deliberate. It was obvious this wouldn't be a routine response. It was going to be direct, clear, and memorable. As Obama straightened and leaned slightly toward the microphone, the hall seemed to pause. Everyone sensed what was coming. When Barack Obama responded, he chose his words carefully. The room was unusually still, the kind of quiet that appears just before something significant. Obama stood behind the podium with his hand resting lightly on the microphone, taking a moment before speaking. The audience shifted, cameras tightened their focus, and even Melania, who had appeared so confident before, now looked unsettled. Obama looked across the crowd, slowly and deliberately. Then his eyes met Melania's for a brief moment, and the atmosphere subtly changed. He finally spoke, his voice steady but calm. "Well," he said after a brief pause, "that was quite a speech." A small wave of uneasy laughter moved through the audience, easing the tension only slightly. Obama offered a polite smile, one that suggested he had heard everything and was ready to respond. "Before I begin," he continued, still composed, "I want to say this: we all care about this country. Everyone here wants to see America succeed. That's something we share, regardless of political differences." Several people nodded. Melania looked down, perhaps assuming the exchange would stay polite, but Obama continued. He leaned in a little, his tone firm but controlled. "But caring about this country also requires honesty. And sometimes honesty makes people uncomfortable." The room quieted again. He straightened his posture, clasped his hands, and added with a thoughtful smile, "It's interesting when people discuss leadership, truth, and responsibility, yet overlook how those ideas actually function." He didn't mention anyone by name, but the implication was clear. Then, in a tone that was light but pointed, he said, "I remember when some questioned whether I was even born in this country." The audience reacted. Melania remained still. Obama looked directly at her. "Some said I wasn't one of you," he continued. "They claimed my birth certificate was fake, that I didn't belong here. And many of those claims," he added with a faint laugh, "came from the same household represented here tonight." The audience responded with a mix of laughter and surprise. Obama smiled, though his expression carried resolve. "It's easy to question another person's truth when you've never had to defend your own," he said. The line settled heavily across the room. Cameras tightened their focus. Melania's posture stiffened, her hands clasped tightly. Obama remained calm, his voice even. Then came the remark that caught everyone off guard. He paused, met her gaze, and said with the same steady tone, "Before we question other people's identities, maybe we should ask, are you certain about your own place in the story?" The room reacted instantly. Some people gasped. Others let out quiet, uncertain laughs. Melania's eyes widened. She tried to respond, but no words came at first. Obama waited, hands still resting naturally on the podium. Finally, she managed, "That's not an appropriate question. You're being disrespectful." Obama tilted his head slightly. "Disrespectful?" he repeated in a mild voice, though the firmness was evident. "You know, spreading false claims, twisting narratives, and attacking others without reason, that's disrespectful too. But calling something inappropriate is often easier when the truth feels close." The audience stayed unsure, caught between reacting or remaining silent. Obama continued, "You talk about image and presentation, how leaders should look and speak. That's fine. But what about honesty? What about integrity? Leadership isn't defined by clothing or camera angles. It's defined by authenticity. He looked around the room slowly. Real leadership means accepting the truth, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. Each word was measured. Turning back to Melania, he added in a lighter but still pointed tone, I understand. It's easy to use certain arguments, especially when people close to you helped create them. The audience shifted, recognizing the reference to the period when Donald Trump promoted the birther claims. Obama leaned slightly toward the microphone, lowering his voice just enough to draw attention. I've stayed quiet about many things. But don't mistake silence for weakness. I've seen and heard more than people realize. And if I wanted to, I could bring forward information that would make many people uneasy. The hall went still. A glass clinked softly somewhere in the room. Obama offered a small, contained smile. So before questioning someone else's truth, make sure your own story doesn't have missing pages. The moment was smooth, controlled, and delivered with impact. Melania now appeared unsettled, her lips pressed together as her gaze shifted away. She took a sip of water, her hand shaking slightly. Obama, still composed, adjusted his jacket and said with friendly ease, Anyway, let's return to the topic of leadership. A soft wave of laughter moved through the audience, offering brief relief, but his message had already been made clear. He had not raised his voice once. His calm manner carried the entire weight. He ended that section of his remarks with a final statement, spoken gently but firmly. Respect isn't demanded. It's earned. And it's earned by truth, not presentation. With that, he smiled, nodded to the host, and stepped away, leaving behind an audience that had just witnessed one of the most controlled and decisive rebuttals seen in recent memory. As he walked back to his seat, applause followed. Slow in the beginning, then growing into steady recognition. Obama did not look back. There was no need. The tension had passed, and he had moved through it with complete composure. The room still felt charged, like a wire pulled tight. Obama had just sat down, quiet confidence surrounding him. The applause continued, but beneath the clapping was a different reaction. Surprise, uncertainty, and a sense of discomfort. Melania sat motionless, her earlier confidence gone. Her posture was rigid, her expression drained of color. Obama's question echoed in her mind. Are you sure you're really Trump's wife? She held her glass tightly, her knuckles pale. Cameras kept flashing and microphones stayed aimed, yet all she seemed aware of was her own pulse. Obama greeted a few guests as he returned to his seat, still calm. The audience whispered non-stop. Everyone recognized that something significant had occurred, something unexpected. Then, without warning, Melania reacted. She stood up abruptly, the sound of her chair sliding across the floor capturing everyone's attention. Her voice cut through the low chatter, tense and unsteady. Mr. Obama, she called out. The room immediately fell silent. Obama turned, raising one eyebrow, his expression steady. Melania breathed in slowly, her voice shaking but audible throughout the hall. You have no right to speak to me that way. I've always supported this country. I've always carried myself with dignity. Obama responded gently. Then why does the truth disturb you to this extent? A few in the audience gasped. Cameras focused in. Melania blinked quickly, searching for words. You distort serious issues. You make light of important matters. You insult my husband. You insult me. Obama held his hands together, his tone steady. I haven't insulted you, Melania. I only asked a question. It seems the question itself struck a nerve. Her lips trembled. You're trying to embarrass me in front of everyone. Obama offered a small, sympathetic smile. No. I'm pointing out what happens when people criticize others while ignoring their own actions. The audience reacted again, some whispering, others recording. The tension climbed. But Melania pressed on. Her voice rose, defensive and strained. You think your comments can hide the failures you left behind. Inflation, rising expenses, unmet promises. That's your record. Obama nodded, stepped slightly toward the microphone, and replied calmly. Interesting, because from what I see, the people governing right now in 2025 aren't exactly working under my name. The audience reacted with another gasp. A few people even clapped. Melania's face tightened with frustration. You always shift blame. You always act like the injured party, she said sharply. Obama's smile faded, his expression more focused. Victim? He replied quietly. No. Melania. I'm not the one who built a political platform around questioning someone else's identity. I'm not the one who fueled a movement about where another person was born. That didn't come from me, he said, pausing for a moment. It came from your own home. The silence that followed was overwhelming. Melania's hands trembled as she tried to respond. You don't know what you're saying. Obama didn't let her finish. His voice remained calm, but there was more firmness now. Actually, I do. When false stories were spread about me, I stayed quiet. I had evidence. I had the truth. I didn't need to shout. He paused, letting the moment sit heavily. Maybe it's time a few other truths come out. The room froze. Melania's eyes widened. What are you talking about? Obama leaned forward slightly, maintaining steady eye contact. Let's just say there are documents, things I've seen, that would make the public view your husband very differently. You could feel the audience holding its breath. Camera lights blinked. Reporters leaned closer. Melania looked pale now, her voice barely audible. You wouldn't dare. Obama gave a small, knowing smile. I don't need to. People already see enough to understand what's wrong. He let that sink in before adding, and if the truth came out about how much influence you actually have inside the White House, people might ask different questions. Melania's lips trembled. You're threatening me. Obama shook his head softly. No. Melania. I'm reminding you that when you try to pull others down with lies, the truth eventually pushes back. The tension was unbearable. Even the host didn't know whether to step in. Obama then said something softly, almost a whisper, but every microphone caught it. Tell your husband that if he wants to keep pretending, he should remember who has the real proof. Melania's jaw dropped. She looked speechless. Obama gave her a polite nod. And just so we're clear, I don't need to show anyone anything. People already see the problem, every time your husband talks about his own daughter. Gasps filled the room. Whispering spread instantly. Everyone knew what he meant, those old remarks that had followed Trump for years. Melania froze, her face drained of color. Her hand shook as she sipped water. The clinking ice was the only sound. Obama didn't look back. He adjusted his jacket, nodded at the host and quietly said, I think my time is done here. He walked off stage, calm, composed, as the audience slowly rose, unsure whether to clap or remain silent. Melania stayed seated, staring at the empty stage. Her voice was gone, her confidence shaken. The woman who had walked uncertain of her words now sat quietly, realizing she had been outmatched sentence by sentence. The event continued, but the atmosphere stayed heavy. Everyone knew they had witnessed something that would be discussed for a long time, not for politics, but for the display of composure and truth. Obama hadn't won by raising his voice. He won by staying steady while others lost theirs. As the cameras kept rolling, Melania whispered something to herself, unheard by anyone. Obama had left, but the message remained in the silence. Respect isn't demanded, it's earned. The hall buzzed faintly, but the energy had shifted. Applause faded into uneasy murmurs. Obama had already exited through a side door, walking calmly down the corridor. His footsteps echoed softly, steady and controlled. Outside, the evening air moved lightly. Obama paused, looking at the night sky. City lights reflected off his glasses as he breathed in slowly. His expression wasn't proud or victorious, more thoughtful, even a little sad. That could have gone better, he said to an aide half smiling. You handled it well, sir, the aide replied. Obama nodded. Maybe. I didn't want to hurt her. I only wanted the truth to land where it needed to. He glanced back toward the hall windows. You can't build anything solid on falsehoods. They eventually collapse. Inside, Melania finally stood. Her steps were slow, heavy with the weight of the exchange. She stopped at a mirror near the exit. Her reflection looked tired. Why did I say so much? She whispered. For the first time that evening, there was no audience, no cameras, just her thoughts. She straightened her jacket and quietly left. Later that night, Everyone would discuss the event. Some would argue about what happened, who was right, who went too far. But those who were present noticed one thing above all else: the contrast between calm and chaos. Obama's calm disarmed everyone. He didn't defend himself with noise but with restraint. His message wasn't just political. It was about principle, about standing steady when others twist truth into spectacle. Melania's reaction, though difficult to watch, was deeply human. The response of someone cornered by words sharper than any confrontation. A reminder that pride can become its own trap. Days later, Obama was asked in an interview what lesson he hoped people took from that night. "Grace under pressure," he replied. When asked if he went too far, he thought for a moment. No. It wasn't about winning. It was about showing that dignity still matters. You can defend yourself, you can disagree, but if you lose your composure, you lose more than the argument. You lose your voice. He leaned back, smiling faintly. And sometimes silence teaches more than shouting ever could. Melania stayed out of the spotlight afterward. Those close to her said she seemed quieter, more reflective. She focused on her causes, kept her appearances brief, avoided public conflict. Privately, people said she had learned a hard lesson about restraint. How one moment of pride can undo months of effort. Months later, they attended another event. Different setting, calmer atmosphere. When Obama saw her across the room, he nodded politely. She nodded back, courteous but distant. No speeches, no confrontation, just acknowledgement. It was an unexpectedly quiet ending. Two people who had faced each other in a storm now sharing the same calm space. The lesson for anyone watching this story is simple and universal. It's not about who won or lost. It's about how truth and composure stand taller than anger or pride. Leadership isn't measured by applause. It's measured by control, empathy, and remaining grounded when everything else shakes. And Melania's silence in the end carried its own meaning. Sometimes silence shows defeat, but other times it shows reflection. As the lights dimmed and the cameras were packed away, one message lingered. Respect isn't demanded. It's earned. Truth doesn't shout. It stands.